What if the old stories were never just stories, but survival guides for being human? Hello, my beautiful souls, and a huge warm welcome back. In this episode, I'm joined once again by the wonderful Tad Hargrave. Tad's been on the show maybe a million times by now, and there's a good reason for that. He's a listener and also team favourite, and a personal favourite of mine too. Tad is a hippie who developed a knack for marketing and then learned how to be a hippie again. Since 2001, he's been weaving together strands of ethical marketing, Waldorf School education, a history in the performing arts, local culture work, anti-globalization activism, an interest in his ancestral traditional cultures, community building, and supporting local economies into this work of helping people create profitable businesses that are ethically grown while restoring the beauty of the marketplace. Together, we explore how living stories form culture, how myths were never meant just as psychological metaphors, but teachings bound to the land, the sun, the soil, and the seasons. From there, our conversation turns to how stories remember what a culture must not forget, why punishment poisons, and how initiation is smuggled into folklore so boys and girls grow into people. Listen if you've ever felt imprinted by myth and then somehow lost your connection to it, wondered why archetypes can sometimes feel lacking, or longed for that sense of homecoming. And before we jump into all of that goodness, first it's time for your weekly omen from the algorithmic oracles. The old storyteller leans close. Pass by, and your alerts echo with hollow chatter. Subscribe, and each week the myths return rich with laughter, wonder, and the wisdom of those who came before. Best subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're struggling with the challenges of walking your soul path in this crazy modern world and would benefit from guidance, kinship, and support, come join Unio, the community for wild sovereign souls. Unio is a living home for those of us on the wild sovereign soul path. And together we reclaim our wildness, actualize our sovereignty, and awaken our souls. Come join us by hopping over to bemythical.com/unio or click the link in the description. And now back to this week's episode. Let's dive in. Hello, Tad. Welcome back.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back.
Well, this is going to be a different conversation to our usual ones. So typically, we've spoken about more, I guess, what you're known for in terms of your work with marketing and niching and all of those things. And as I was just saying saying to you just now, I've noticed that you and I have over the years sort of gone on our own journey with all things myth, folktale. And I wanted to just know a bit more about that. What that's not at all from a business perspective, although I'm sure as these things do, they absolutely bleed their gold into all aspects of our lives. But I just wanted to understand what what brought you into this world of myth and folktale and story and what it tells us about I guess our place in the world of things. That's what I really wanted to explore with you today. So, as you said, who knows how this is going to go, but let's sound that direction. So, I wanted to begin with asking you if you were to look back in your childhood. I noticed that those of us that kind of drawn back to myth, often there's a kind of like we can see the seeds were set far longer ago, and then for whatever reason we lost touch. Is that the case for you?
Yeah. Yeah, my mom would read to us all the time, and I went to Waldorf School, so there was so much myth and
Oh
folk.
yes.
Yeah, so
Mm.
yeah, it only really occurred to me in the last couple of years, like, oh, right, I grew up hearing these stories and told orally by the teachers. So I grew up sort of awash in that, like Waldorf students are, and yeah, so in my childhood, for certain, there's that.
Mm. Yeah, it's fascinating to me how many of us that it's like we were imprinted, but then for some reason, like let go of it. And For you, can you remember I'll share a bit of what I realise now tracking back happened for me, but do you recognise there was a time and perhaps the reason why you did let that go for a period?
Yeah, I went to public school.
Mm,
More stories, I guess. We went to McKernan Junior High in Edmonton, and was much more interested in fitting in, than I was about following some kind of thread around mythology. And it was, I mean, when I was younger, it wasn't so profound. Though I loved reading, I was at the library all the time after school. I'd just go read books. It wasn't they were old folk tales at all. Just um, kids books. And I, yeah, this and then I went to high school, got involved in the whole personal growth scene. Ended up the kind of reconnection point. One of the reconnection points was I ended up moving to. Well, I attended a camp put on by this group, Youth for Environmental Sanity, based out of Santa Cruz. And the two of the facilitators, there were three facilitators, and two of them were uh, Waldorf students. And a lot of the people who were there at this camp ended up being Waldorf students. And I couldn't figure out, like, why do I feel so at home with these people?
mm,
And then I came out, I was like, oh, right, there's something familiar about the aesthetic, the vibe, the kind of way of being. And so that, woke something up in me, but not around stories exactly. And then through them, I started a project called Youth Jams, which was bringing together leading young change makers from around the world. So I started that in 1999. It's still going today. And
wow.
yeah, yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, 26 years later, it's still going. And I ran it for a few years. And the inkling on the selfish end, I just wanted to hang out with all these amazing young people who were up to amazing things that I was never going to do in my life. Mostly, I mean, thank God in a way, because they were doing these things out of tragedy and circumstance that
Mm,
this place. But I kind of wanted to hang out and, at the selfish level, be in that limelight a bit of all these amazing young leaders. But also, I had this sense about the importance of bringing good people together, which has been a through line in my life. And I just thought, if we could, instead of conferences where you just are sitting in plenary, just get the people I want to hang out for a week. And so we did that. And at the second one, there were a lot of Indigenous folks, and the third one, even more. And they'd always introduce themselves in their own language and say who their people were. And I had friends who were a part of this group at NIA, the Indigenous Non-Indigenous Youth Alliance, and they were getting together doing ceremony, and they kept inviting me. And they were very persistent on that matter, and I never went because I don't know, I just didn't have the interest, the draw, like the music, the story, the drumming, the dance, the song of different Indigenous people. As much as I was green with envy about it and admired it, but I felt no connection to it.
mm,
And then a fellow Puma Kispe Singona and another fellow Clayton Thomas Mueller, was a Swampy Cree guy from Winnipeg, and Puma from Peru. They both said, "You have your own Celtic ancestry. You should look at that." And suddenly something hit me as a wait, Gaelic. I do have an indigenous language. And
mm,
I've always loved those stories and that drumming and that dance and the song and the bagpipes. All of that has always moved me and stirred me. Like when I hear indigenous people singing their songs, it's beautiful. I admire it. And some of them I enjoy more than others and feel more drawn to than others, but none of them evoke that home feeling. And so this
mm.
has done that for me. And so that, opened up this enormous container of spiritual hunger and cultural hunger. And I was unbearable for years because I was just reading all the books, listening to bagpipes or like Celtic music. On. Every room I went in, I just had to have it on. Um, it was like I'd been starving and I was getting nourished.
Mm.
And so part of that was I went to the Isle of Skye. Well, I did weekly Gaelic classes in Edmonton. Then I went to St. FX in Nova Scotia to do Celtic studies for a year. And then I went
Oh,
to
I didn't know
Salt.
that.
Yeah, I went to
Mm.
Salmore back on the Isle of Skye for half a year doing studying Gaelic, and all the classes are in Gaelic. And while I was there, I ended up meeting this storyteller, George McPherson, who died just January this year. And he was the old wizard. You know, he was the archetypal storyteller that you only exist in movies, but he was real, and he knew so many things about these old stories. And so I got to learn from him a little bit, and that woke up this hunger for the stories.
Mm.
I ended up going back. I had a health incident, gallbladder stuff, and I ended up going back to Canada to deal with that. And I had to hustle to make money. And I had this inward thought of, it'll be 10 years before I look at this again, before I have time. And that ended up being about true. Then in 2014, I joined the Orphan Wisdom School with Stephen Jenkinson. And that reopened the door to all those things. And it hasn't closed since. And I suppose most recently, over the last 3 or 4 years, been studying with Stephanie Mackay, of course, who you've brought in. She and I have become friends. And a dear friend of mine, Kikisimo Esqueu, who's a Métis Indigenous cultural activist from Alberta. And she and I have done some work together on stories. And so, yeah, that's up until now, anyways.
Well, quite a story. Um, oh my gosh, there's so much in what you just shared. And going back to what you said in terms of it didn't necessarily seem that profound, the childhood immersion in story. And yet, I think that's the thing. There's an almost whatever our childhood is normalized, isn't it? And I was thinking, even though I didn't go to Waldorf School, because I was raised by a hippie, I mean, I may as well have been. And I think there is that kind of immersion in that. There's always this kind of, my sense is, this is my projection on what you just said. Um, those of us that have had those sort of slightly alternative upbringings, there is almost like the veil just feels thinner. And there is this kind of like the accessibility to this other world. I look back at my childhood and the way that, for example, one of the ways that I was immersed in myth and story was my father used to play Dungeons and Dragons with us. And it just used to bring these whole worlds to life, which I honestly thought were half real. You know, it didn't really feel less real than whatever was called, normal life. And so it sort of doesn't feel profound because it feels normal, but there is some sort of normalized magic that at some point, and again, my own experience was similar to yours, there was like, oh, there is this normal world that I'm meant to fit in, and that kind of other world doesn't have a place here.
Yeah. I was thinking I felt that way about Doctor Who when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Part of me was convinced
Mm,
it was for real. If you're raised in an oral culture, you're raised hearing these stories.
mm,
Um, they are true because they're stories about the land. They're story about the place that you live. There's stories about that. You start to realize as you get older that these are stories not just set in the land, but actually stories about the land. This woman in the story is the land. Um, And so then you live in a storied landscape. You live where you're never alone. You're always awash in these stories. You're surrounded by your history, your ancestry, and the mythology you live in. And now, instead of that, we get psychology.
mm. I did an episode. I don't know if you're familiar with Kathleen Matthews. She's, I think you'd love her and her work, actually. She's her and her husband, John Matthews. They are
Oh,
an incredible pair. You know John Matthews?
well, I thought I would have pronounced it Caitlin, but it's
No, you don't. It's written Kaylin, but it's a Irish way of saying that particular spelling of her name. Yeah,
okay.
I would.
Well,
Yes,
yes,
but
I'm well
you
familiar.
do know. um, so yes, absolutely wonderful woman. And we were talking on the podcast last week about the way that modern psychology has almost like just kind of pulled the archetypes out of the stories. So you kind of like you lose the roots, you lose that context, and you kind of got these archetypes which have power and are, are in some ways, for, I guess, at best, they can be a doorway back into story, but only if we realize it's missing or allow them to sort of bring us back into the story. But I think that's the challenge, isn't it? Is recognizing the archetypes alone are bereft of the land they came from, really simply put.
Yeah, I think that's the extra step. It's not just getting the archetype back in the story, because there is that, right? You get stories that
Mm,
have these people in them, and instead of talking about the specific person, we make an archetype out of them, like this is the wicked witch, or this is the handsome prince, and so then it's no longer a specific handsome prince. It's no longer
mm,
specific witch. It's archetype. So yeah, when you put it back in the story, now there's more context and there's more understanding of this person. And then you could take a next step and realize that wait, um, within a living culture, these stories are all connected.
yes.
So
Hmm.
you start, yes, you get a story about the wolf being a bad person in this story, but then you learn the backstory of the wolf and why they're necessary in another story when you're older.
Mm,
So you get a nest of stories, and still that next step, as you said, that has to happen is it has to go back to the land, because uh, these stories, it's so important to remember this. All of these oral tradition stories, everything in Grimm's, everything in Italo Calvino's collection of Italian myths, all these collections, um, they come from oral traditions. Yeah, these come from people who pass the stories on knee to knee, you know, meaning grandchild on the knee to the next grandchild on the knee, for generations. And so that then is bound by memory, human memory, which is not infinite. I mean, now, yeah, you want 20 versions of a story, just hit Google and boom, you've got them. You can
mm,
order the books. But back then, you had a limits of memory, so you couldn't afford to remember everything. You might hear a story and it's very entertaining, but you got to do the quick math of like, is that worth remembering or not?
mm,
Does it stick or not? And if it doesn't, away it goes. So the reason these stories are kept, I would submit, is because they have teachings and teachings about how to be a good human in the world and a good human on a particular place of land. How do we live? How do we survive? The stories have those teachings. That's the function of culture. Um, I heard that first from my friend Kisimo Esqueu, who got it from this elder Narcissus Blood. That culture are these sets of teachings of how do you live on the land. And
mm,
so, um, if you don't understand that that's what the stories are for, and that the stories are actually uh, primarily there to help you understand the architecture of life. In the
mm,
absence of the architecture, you get archetype. In the absence of seeing the real things, that this is the sun and this is the moon and these are the stars and this is the tree and this is a story about this plant. In the absence of that, which is the real architecture of the world, you can actually see and hear and taste and touch and experience. We get these inner indwelling archetypes that have no context to them. So the context of so many of these stories has been ripped away, which of course is why Stephanie Mackay's work is so important. Is this reweaving of the context back into the what's now just empty content? Um, and it's not that the psychological level. I mean, I just interviewed Stephanie myself a couple of days ago. It's not that like the psychological level isn't there, but it's good to remember none of these stories were crafted by Jungian analysts.
mm,
None of these stories
yes.
were crafted by
Mhm,
people who had the faintest idea about what psychology was in the modern sense. They were also all crafted by people who had a very collective sense of identity, primarily an individual second. It was not, this wasn't a in hyper individuated existence. It wasn't a nuclear family existence. It was a village existence that existed in the context of the natural world. So, so now we live these hyper individuated things. We have no connection to the land, most of us. Um, and so then it's all just inner archetypes, which is it's beautiful in that if you follow the thread of the inner archetype, it will eventually deliver you back to the architecture of the world.
mm,
But
I
it's
see
easy to
that.
drop that thread and it's
Mm.
easy, and it's hard, it's desperately hard to do. Like, if you think, "Oh, this character, in the story is the devil, and that's really actually just the inner devil in me," and you don't realize that actually in that story, they're the they're the devil because they had to become the devil to cover up for the fact that this was a story about the sun, and this is a story about the real sun, and not just, you know what I'm saying? Like, you take it from
Mm.
the sun to a story about the sun to, oh, we can't have it be a pagan sun god, so it's got to become the devil, and now it's my inner devil, and that's
Mm.
and so suddenly you're just, yes, there's value in, okay, looking at your inner devil. There's benefit to this. It's not bereft of purpose, but it is far from the purpose of why that story really existed to begin with.
Yes. You've I've just joined some dots between a couple of things I hadn't seen this way before. So much of my studies over the last 5 years or so has been in various forms of shamanism. And you don't need to spend too long around traditional shamans to recognize that our modern ideas of shamanism, which has also been very psychologized, um, it doesn't take many conversations before you start to realize, like, oh, it's ultimately about these are practical things, like about survival, and just like you're saying, not survival for the individual, but survival for that community. And um it's a completely our the way we see the world in the modern terms, if we don't really have the way of perceiving things for that to fully make sense, but we can start to, oh, okay, the way I see things is so different that even just like realizing I don't know is a start to kind of like go back to something that is, I guess, more real, true. And so that's been something that I've been realizing over, say, the last 5 years or so around shamanism. And I just realized my current shamanic teacher is Indigenous Mongolian. And as you were talking, I was like, of course, there's I guess, historical the way that we as humans in community have worked with shamanism is not really any different in some ways to how we've worked with story. And in fact, the two things are so intrinsically linked. There's so many times that I'll hear a story that has some kind of meaning in a Mongolian, like it was a story that happened in Mongolia that makes sense of these teachings. And half the time, I'm not sure if it actually happened, if it's a real story, or if it's a story that is meant to be a teaching, maybe both. It's never really said directly like this actually happened or not. Um, but I just suddenly saw, you're completely right. Just like with shamanism, stories had this very practical survival for the collective reason for being. And that completely changes how we orientate to them. And again, the fact that, like you're saying, they have an architecture, but the architecture is so specific. It's not a kind of there are things that are sort of generally relevant to humans living in this world, but many of them are also very specific to that particular land and what makes sense given that land's temperature and animals and plants, which again makes sense when you're trying to survive, and not just survive, but live well, live alongside those beings. Um, there's something about what you said there that was like, of course, that is allowed me to see the same is happening with shamanism and story that we've forgotten.
One of the examples of this is, there's a story I got from George, Todomak Krupach, which is a story, crippled Norman or lame Norman. But basically, you understand as you hear the story, it's the story of a man who has rheumatoid arthritis. He's, knotted up and bent over, and he's sore to walk. When he bumps into things, it hurts and that kind of thing. And there's a part in the story where he's visiting the little people and he's just given them some gifts to get his cow, his beloved cow Ailey back. And they say, well, you know, Torma, you've given us good gifts. So now we'll give you gifts. And they take out witch hazel and nettle and they start beating him, and they beat him and they beat him and they beat him with it, which hardly seems like a gift. He's screaming, and then he, he flies back to his home, and he's standing upright, and he doesn't have the arthritis anymore, and he is naked because he gave them all of his clothes. So his name is no longer Tormat Krupach; it becomes Tormat Laum, naked Norman. Uh, but the if somebody doesn't understand what this story is, what they'll say is, and then they took out some branches and began to beat him with those branches,
Mm.
you know, and they forget that it's witch hazel and it's stinging nettle, both of which do wonders for rheumatoid arthritis, both
Oh,
of which
wow.
are medicinal
Mm.
for that specific condition. And so, I mean, that's one detail in one story, but that's why you have this, all
Yeah.
of these stories, they've got knowledge about plants in them and what those plants are good
Mm.
for, also what they're not good for. Which don't eat the rose hips and make your butt itchy, and like this will be
Mhm.
in a funny kids story, but the kids are learning about the local plants through the stories. And then there's stories that have the natural world in them. So there's a story, The Devil and the Three Golden Hairs, which I've heard from Duncan Williamson, but there's a Czech version of it. And in The Devil and the Three Golden Hairs, this woodcutter wants to marry a princess, so he has to go collect three golden hairs from the devil's head. And there's a whole journey to get there and come back. But if you just stop and think about it, it's like, wait, why does he have to go see the devil? And why are they golden hairs in the first place? Why would the devil have golden hair? Like, it just doesn't, it's not a natural, oh, that all makes sense.
Mm.
And this is one of the ways I think you're catching onto a story, is that every part of the story suddenly makes sense. It all starts to click into
Mm.
that. Every image in the story contains the whole story. Every image in the
Mm.
story, the whole story is there. It's like a hologram. You take a part of the hologram, and the whole hologram's there from a different angle, a little fuzzier. And if you have all the parts of the hologram, it's a crystal clear image. And so it's the same with a culture. All the stories
Mm.
give you a crystal clear something. One story has the whole culture in it. Every single story is a seed of culture. And every story itself, Stephanie talks about, is a seed jar, has many, many images, and each of those images are seeds that contain the whole story. So then you look at the older version of this story, and it's like, wait a minute, no, it's not the devil. He's the son. He's grandfather know-all. And why does he know everything? Because he's the son, and he goes across the sky, and he sees everything all the time. And when he goes back home, this old man, it's in some version, well, the devil goes and he lays his head on his mother's lap and falls asleep. And you're like, that's a little weird. Here's a grown man. Here's an old man falling asleep on
Not judging, but
a, maybe look at your Oedipus complex, or you got some kind of, we would psychologize that. And this is what
Mm.
happens with these stories is, you'd say, oh yeah, well, this is about how men go back to their mother, and when things are hard, and why we need to stop that. But no, he's the sun, and so she's the earth, and so that's the sunset, the sun resting his head on the earth as he falls asleep, because that's what it looks like, you know
Mm.
and then you realize, wait, him getting three golden hairs from the devil's head, there's a seasonal thing. This is a young man's initiation, where he's bringing back three golden hairs. So he's bringing the sun back with him to his people. So it's, he's going there in winter to bring back the sun. And that's his heroism.
Mm.
And so the story suddenly has this much deeper, richer meaning in the old Czech version too. In the Grimm's version, um, he gets some gold and treasure from this one king he helps along the way with, insight he got from the devil, gets some more treasure from another one. But in the old Czech version, he gets 12 white horses and then 12 black horses. Well, so there you go. You've got 12 days of sunlight, 12 hours of nighttime, or 12, 12.
Mm.
So there's a very clear, okay, there's something about the equinox in this then.
Mm.
There's something about the equal time being measured in the horses. So all the details in the story start to like, oh my God, it's all, every detail reinforces the other detail, versus what happens now is, whether it's psychology or sort of, a feminist bent, is like, well, this is a story that's oppressing women. It's like, well, you say that because you don't understand what the story is. Because, okay, so great. So Briar Rose, the story of Briar Rose, it's a story about the passive feminine. She falls asleep. She's rescued by the active masculine. So the Freudians would say, well, it's not so bad because there's a part of us that's asleep. This feminine part needs to be reawoken by the masculine. Okay, fair enough. But then it's still, okay, why 12 golden plates? Why is there a talking frog? Why does she prick her finger on a spindle? Why is it a rusty key? Why is it a small door? Why is there a bed in the room that she falls asleep on? Why all the animals in particular fall asleep? Why is the prince's mother in the French version? Why is she an ogre that wants to eat his kids? Like, it doesn't line up. You can make
Mm.
sense of one detail and strip it of the context of the story and say this is what it is. But unless all the details in the story line up, and the details from all the versions of the story, can line up, I just think we don't have it. And I think the reason we usually don't have it is because we've forgotten where the stories come from.
Yeah. Mm. So before we but the time's flown by, and I want to make sure that before we close, I hear, and it might be that is the story that you're going to say, which by all means name if it is Briar Rose. Is there a story that was the one that it was suddenly you realized like, there's a there, it grabbed you, it moved you, it suddenly was more than just information.
No, yeah, that was the first one, would have been the Beaten Stick, Duncan Williamson. And it's, oh man, it's a big story. We don't really have time. The short version is Jack lives with his mother, and he works at a butcher, and it makes a good living. And every night his mother would come home with the meat, and the mother would tell him good stories. He'd fall asleep, and one day she says, oh, it looks troubled, what's wrong? My sister, I just know she's in trouble. You have a sister? Yeah, I got a twin sister. You have a twin sister that I never knew about? Yeah, but she left here a while ago. She got a reputation for being in the dark arts. No such thing as the dark arts. Anyway, she got a reputation. She had to go, but she's my twin. I have a feeling she's in trouble. And could you just go see her? Jack's like, I can't leave my mother. I can't, it'd be terrible. And like, no, 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 I'd be fine. Do me in the world, would you do it? Okay. So he goes off on this journey to find his aunt, and see if she's okay. And it's this incredible journey. And on the way there, he meets this old stick lady who gives him this. It's a blackthorn stick, and because he helps her out carrying some sticks. And he's like, I don't need a walking stick. She's like, it's a magic stick. You'll be glad you have it. And whenever you're in trouble, you just say, beat them stick, and the stick will, beat them and send them away. Well, he's walking. He passes a hazel grove, and in the hazel grove, he hears a commotion. He thinks, well, maybe people having a bit of a session, and there'll be some food and grub and entertainment. And spend the night there. When he gets closer, he realizes it's more of a holdup, and there are these three noblemen on horses, and they're surrounded by these really 50 rough-looking characters. And he just thinks, well, that's not fair. That's hardly a fair fight. And Jack is all about fairness, and so he is beat them stick, and the stick knocks out all the rough-looking characters, and the man on the horse in the sand, do you know who I am? No, he says, well, I'm the king, and I want you to come meet the queen. So he takes him to the castle. When they get there, gives the king, or the king gives Jack wine and food, and feeds him. And he says, I'd like to introduce you to the queen, but actually she's very sick. She's asleep, or she hasn't been able to sleep in months, and she's desperate with it. And Jack said, oh, it's terrible. What happened? He said, I don't know, but it started when there's this young boy, and he stole this fruit from the tree. It's the tree of life, the tree of health. My father had it. It's in the garden there. Um, and whenever you eat it, you never get sick. You're never unhealthy. But he stole us, so we had to punish him. We threw him in the dungeon, and that night she couldn't sleep. So he says, well, I'm going to go visit my aunt. She's into the dark arts, so maybe she knows something. The king says, take a horse, take whatever you need. I mean, I'd be so grateful. He goes off, meets his aunt. His aunt, of course, knows everything. And it's like, I can tell you what that is, but just spend a few days with me because I'm lonely at the edge of the world. And he's okay. So he does, but he goes back, and this takes months, this whole journey. He comes back. The king's overjoyed to see him. Did you find out what it is? He says, yeah, So the trouble started with you punished the boy and you shouldn't have punished him because it wasn't fair for him to be. So you got to let him go. That's the first thing. And so he says, okay. So he lets the boy go. He says, now your queen can't sleep because his sister, who's the one who combs the queen's hair every night, she's been tying knots in the queen's hair. That's why she can't sleep. The king says, I didn't even know he had a sister, and I'll punish her. He's like, no, 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 no. See, you just how quickly forget about the punishing thing. So you got to let her go too. So away she goes home because their mother's in the dark arts. And he says, but what about the tree? He says, well, the tree, that young girl, she put a sword under the tree. And that's why. So they go out into the garden, rustles around, finds this rusty sword, pulls it out. It blossoms into heavy with fruit. The king's amazed, rewards him with gold. He goes home and tells his mother the same story I just told you. So that's a hopelessly condensed version. But the
It had
thing
a
that,
certain charm, Tad. You did a good job there.
so what's clear in this story, there's so many layers to it. One, this is the story of the initiation of a young man who's gotten to the point where the men should have come and taken him away, and no man came, so his mother sends him on an adventure to the world so the world can
Mm.
initiate him. But maybe it's in cahoots with the king. Maybe this is all part of the game. Maybe this is what it looks like. She knows she has to send him on that road where he'll meet the king, and all of this is supposed to happen. And the old stick lady, at one point she says, oh, this is before anything happens. She gives him the blackthorn stick, says, oh yeah, I love sticks, because she's got piles of sticks all around her property. And he's like, wow, you're a fan, huh? So, oh, I love sticks. Any kind of stick is a good stick. You got your jaggy sticks, your thorn sticks, your hazel sticks, your ash sticks, your oak sticks. Any kind of stick is a good stick. So that little detail, that run that she does of the types of trees, that's the sequence in the story. She is about to
Mm.
give him a jaggy thorn stick. He's about to walk by a hazel grove. The ash tree in Norse mythology, and this story clearly has some Norse connections to it, is the ash tree. This is the mother tree. So now this is a young boy learning how to approach the feminine and
Mm.
court the feminine. And then the oak, to me, is the king tree. So there's a whole sequence of things that are put in this little detail in the story. And I remember I'd read the story 10 times before I realized, oh my God, it's a prediction of what's about to happen, or it's a
Mm.
prophecy, or this is her telling the story of the story that's about to come. And he's being leaned on as a young man to heal the world. That he has to do something to restore the tree of life, this tree of health. So, there's so many levels to it, but that was the first story I read where I thought, oh my God, this story is so deep and profound. It's, yes, entertaining for little kids. The stick around and knocks everybody out, and kids always laugh and take glee in this, but there's more to it.
Mm. And for you personally, if I appreciate these things are hard to summarize neatly, but if you were to, and perhaps it's changed over the years, I noticed that the stories that really speak to us, they kind of keep calling us back. And then we're like, oh, now I'm here. Now this is how it's speaking to me. But either now or then, what was what was the meaning for you? What was it letting you know about what you were being called to?
At that time, I had endured some real harshness from a particular community, and public harshness. It was very painful. And it had me interested in restorative justice. And I saw in this story, that was the first layer of it, like, oh, this is a story about the consequences of punishment, the consequence
Mm.
of unfair punishment, and what it does to the culture that you live in. The sword specifically, it's not put in the tree. It's put in the soil underneath the tree. So the soil, the living culture that sustains the tree, is damaged. And so when the culture and the goodwill between people is damaged, uh, this is bad news for everybody, and everybody suffers as a result of it. So that was the thing I initially saw, and then the initiation as a young man, that layer came later. But yeah, that was the first thing I saw.
Mm. Yeah. Oh, bless you. The thought of you being treated that way just, but I'm so glad you had the story to guide you through that. So I know that we're up on time, and I'm really glad we had the chance to have this conversation. Although I feel like we could have gone on for another hour at least and told some more stories. But for the moment, thank you so much, Tad. It's been lovely to explore this side of you. Although we haven't talked about much about your work at all, I'm sure listeners would want to know more about you and what you're up to. Where can they do that?
Well, on the cultural front, you can check out tadhargrave.substack.com. So I'm on Substack. And then, of course, I do the marketing work, marketingforhippies.com. And I'll also give a plug, again, for Stephanie Mackay, who does such fantastic work on stories. I think it's stephaniemackay.ca. But if you're interested in really unfurling the deeper ancestral layers of these European stories, I've never seen anyone with the touch that she has.
Mm. Yeah, I quite agree. It was a really magical connection that you helped make there for me. Thank you. Well, for the moment, Tad, thank you. It's been a real pleasure as ever.
You too. Take care.
Thank you. Bye bye. What a rich show that was. Here were my favourite parts. Tad's search for meaning through story carried him from activism to ancestral study, rekindling a sense of true belonging. Old stories once carried medicine, mapping the plants, elements, and ethics that kept a people alive. When myth is severed from land, it becomes psychology. But when rooted back in place, it restores meaning, memory, and true connection. If you'd like to hop on over to the show notes for the links, they're at bemythical.com/podcast/527. And as you heard me say earlier, if you're struggling with the challenges of walking your soul path in this crazy modern world and would benefit from guidance, kinship, and support, come join us in Unio, the community for wild sovereign souls. You can discover more and join us by hopping on over to bemythical.com/Unio or click the link in the description. And if you don't want to miss out on next week's episode, head on over to your podcasting app or platform of choice, including YouTube, and hit that subscribe or follow button. That way, you'll get each episode delivered straight to your device auto magically as soon as it's released. Thank you so much for listening. You've been wonderful. I'm sending you all my love. I'll catch you again next week. And until then, go be mythical.